Morning, everybody. How you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. It's Sunday stroll for Bugsy and I. Hope you are all keeping yourselves out of trouble. It's a fairly non-eventful morning in the world of Tottenham Hotspur. Lots of news out regarding Everton's 10-point deduction due to FFP, financial impropriety. Lots of commentary regarding, well, if that's the precedent been set, then what does it mean for teams like Manchester City, who face 115 charges over an extended period of time? What about Chelsea with, their self-owning, self-advising of their situation with regards an extended period of time in the reign of Roman Abramovich? And of course, we don't know what's going to happen. But, these are, you hope, unless you're someone who's directly involved, directly impacted, you would hope that justice is served. Obviously, we don't know the details, right? But if Everton have been fined or sanctioned 10 points for not deliberate misuse of FFP, but obviously just miscalculations, and have been hit 10 points, and they now sit rock bottom of the Premier League table, and are also in the process of potentially being sued by 3 or 4 of the clubs that faced or had relegation thrust upon them in the years where their financial impropriety stemmed from, then allegedly they could be sued for up to £300 million and face further points deductions as well if found guilty of, in those particular sort of civil liabilities, civil sort of lawsuits. It's a moving target, so I don't want to get stuck into the weeds too much, but I think, again, if you distance yourself, obviously most of the people that are going to watch this are Tottenham fans, so I'm going to try and take it back to Tottenham. But what is the kind of the right and reasonable thing to do here? A lot of people are saying it's outrageous that Everton, have to be hit the way that they are. And a lot of experts are saying that. A lot of ex-footballers are saying that. And to me, I find that a little bit of a crazy narrative, because it's the opposite of victim shaming. It's culprit excusing. There's consequences to what Everton did. They pushed the boat out. They spent money they weren't allowed to spend. They bought players of a quality that they shouldn't have been able to have bought. And consequently, by hook or by crook, they had enough points relative to the others that they were competing with to remain in the Premier League. A 10-point deduction this season puts them rock bottom, but they're only 3 points away from getting out of trouble once again in the Premier League. And if it was to finish like this, they may find themselves, with the run of form that they're currently in, still absolutely in no jeopardy of going down within a couple of months. And they might find themselves sort of seemingly having gotten away with it. Meanwhile, the other 3 teams who are suing them face the consequences of having to sell a lot of their best players, lose a lot of their best revenue streams, the sponsorships, that sort of stuff, as a consequence of being relegated to the Championship. And so, I'm not sure even if justice was served for Everton or for the victims of Everton's behaviour. I'm not sure if 10 points is enough. But what it does set the precedent for is that if Everton were found guilty of one incident, one financial fair play misdemeanour, then if Chelsea and Manchester City are found guilty of the things that they are alleged to have committed, then surely a financial penalty is not sufficient, and surely a points deduction really isn't either, at least not to the same degree. And you have to think outside the box a little bit when you're thinking about, like, with Chelsea, well, it wasn't Todd Boehly, it was Abramovich, and they've come forward and shone light on it themselves, hoping that, that they've calculated in their head that a financial penalty for the wrongdoings of the previous owner will suffice. I'm not sure it will anymore. And to be entirely honest, you have to also bake in the realities of the benefits that Todd Boehly et al. Are still finding to this day as a consequence of the alleged cheating, if proven, has afforded them. Chelsea's reign under Abramovich was the most successful in a short period of time of any team in the Premier League, I believe. And if they were doing that and achieving their successes through bending the rules, breaking the rules, hiding transactions, bestowing gifts upon people that have influence to try and sign the players and the managers that you wanted that led to the success that you achieved, then you now have a club that has a brand value that is significantly higher, and the benefits of will continue to linger and continue to drip feed and yield dividends for years to come as a consequence of the deeds, the misgivings, the inaccuracies of financial accounting of a yesteryear, a very successful yesteryear. Are players now signing for Chelsea because of the recent relative successes of a time when Chelsea were cheating? Do they have a significant slice of their current revenue stream created ultimately by a fan base that has been harvested because of the success of a prior generation that started and finished around, surrounded by cheating? If all those things are true, then a slap on the wrist with financial penalties is not enough. A points deduction, I don't think, is enough. I think you have to strip them of all the titles, and I think you have to send them to the Championship to set a precedent. And this is the same for Manchester City. Again, 115 charges, far too many to go through in the space of a short video, but all surrounding the mismanagement or the appropriation of funds so that you could essentially have less expenses on your books, therefore affording you the ability to buy players that you wouldn't otherwise have been able to have done if you had allocated your costs accordingly. And on top of that, having money inserted into the club via sponsorships from third parties that are not at all third party. They are all directly related, directly owned by the family that owns Manchester City. Again, difficult to prove, but if proven, the consequences have to be harsh, because the two most successful football clubs in the Daniel Levy era have been Chelsea and Manchester City. And if both of those clubs have only achieved the successes that they have by breaking the rules, when they already have a leg up on everybody else because of the money that their owners had anyway, then they need to be dealt with accordingly, in my opinion. Again, stripping of titles and relegation seems reasonable. And I'm not saying this as someone that's jealous of their success or wants them to be stripped to help Tottenham out. I'm not coming at this from a Tottenham perspective yet. I will bring it back to Tottenham. But I think that if Everton have been hit the way that they've been hit, and there was no intentional, deliberate misuse, it was just miscalculations of finances and obviously embedding incorrect values on players that they thought they could get the correct valuations for in their minds that they ultimately couldn't. Sorry, I'm really bunged up. To me, guys, the next part of that story, if you do strip them of their titles, the next part of the conversation has to go to, should you give the titles to the teams that finish second in the league or runners-up? If so, the likes of Manchester United, the likes of Arsenal, the likes of Liverpool will all have their trophy cabinet boosted. And again, I'm not saying this from a perspective that suits Tottenham, because ultimately it's irrelevant, but the answer should be no. If you look at Lance Armstrong in the cycling Tour de France era, when it was proven that he was doping and he admitted it, he was stripped of all of his titles, and they didn't give the titles to the second place teams, the second place riders or the third place riders, etc. They just basically said there were no winners that particular season. And I think the same thing should be embedded for any eventuality that results in Manchester City and Chelsea having their titles stripped from them. It shouldn't go to the second place team, the runners-up. And the reasons why are twofold for me. One, in 30 years' time, 40 years' time, if you just strip Manchester City and Chelsea of all of their titles and you replace them with the team that came second, in either the Cups or in the league, then there'll be no asterisks. It will just be the titles handed to the team that came second. Whereas in reality, I think the benefit of being exposed as a cheat would be forever to be remembered as one. And in so doing, if you look back in the annals of history and you see that from the years 2012 to 2018, in these particular seasons, there was no winner of the Carabao Cup, there was no winner of the Premier League, there was no winner of the FA Cup, whatever the circumstances might be, then future generations will ask why. And the story will have to be told, it was because Manchester City won it, but they were cheating. Chelsea won it, but they were cheating. Whereas if it's just replaced with Manchester United and Arsenal and Liverpool, no one's going to ask the question, and over time people will forget what happened. So I think that there needs to be an indelible mark, a stain, a black blemish against those particular years, so that people ask questions in the future. Why, what happened in those seasons? Why there's not an outright winner? And that's not enough of a reason itself. The other reason why I think it's important is this isn't just to punish the likes of Liverpool and Manchester United and Arsenal, but I don't believe that they would necessarily be the outright winners if Manchester City and Chelsea hadn't cheated. Like, it's an entirely new timeline of events because they're not cheating in one game. It's not like they are, fixing the odds of a final. That gets exposed and ultimately they get taken away and given to the team who was cheated on its day. But over the course of a season, if the players that these clubs had signed had not signed for these clubs because they couldn't afford them at the time, then they would have gone somewhere else. Case in point is Willian at Chelsea. One of the alleged breaches that Chelsea have been accused of is financially bunging the transfer of Willian to Chelsea. He went on to become the player of the year that year for Chelsea when they went on to win the league. But he was supposed to sign for Tottenham on transfer deadline day. And so if Chelsea can't sign Willian because they weren't able to cheat and they stuck by the rules, then Willian would have come to Tottenham. So in that scenario, just in that one individual scenario, you have an entirely new timeline where Chelsea don't have the player of the season and Tottenham do. But Tottenham might not have generated Willian to a level where he would have been the player of the season. It's an entirely new team, an entirely new set of fixtures, an entirely new historical alternative reality. But Tottenham, you could make the argument, would have benefited more had Chelsea not been able to have cheated. And so where would Tottenham then have beaten the other teams more than they did? Would they have lost other games? So you have an entirely new series of events that pans out. So there's no guarantee that had Chelsea not cheated on that one event, let alone the countless others, that the team that came second in the years they were successful would have come second. And so for me, you can't just make the assumption that if the team that won cheated, the team that came second should get the trophy. I just don't think it makes logical sense. But I do think that when these teams have their day in court, if they're found guilty, then these teams need to be appropriately punished. And if 10 points and a potential administration for Everton pending further litigation is on the cards for the team that's done the least wrong of the three, then what does that say should be appropriate for the likes of Manchester City and Chelsea, should they be found guilty of the things that they are accused of doing? We shall see. What I would say, guys, is that there's absolutely no chance in my mind that Tottenham Hotspur, even under a fine audit, would come up against certain allegations. I just got the impression that Daniel Levy, when it comes to this stuff, is so vocal about about the need for stringent laws to be imposed, implemented, and punishments to be espoused, that he wouldn't be quite as chirpy about that stuff if he thought Tottenham were also on the chopping block should there be an audit into our activities. Let me know your thoughts. Like, subscribe and comment, and as always, bye bye.